How have you seen companies try to increase trust across a business?
The game changer is the leader. Like, there's no two ways around it. When it comes to being vulnerable in a leadership team, and especially when we're talking about, C-suites and executives and just any team, to be fair, but especially in that environment, is if the leader is unable to be vulnerable, then nobody else on his team ever will be.
Good. All right. Well, morning, Matt Lashbrook. Thank you very much for joining us. Topic of discussion today is the five dysfunctions of a team. So, an interesting book published in 2002, of course. But do you want to just give us a quick background to a little bit to yourself and a little bit to the table group and the background to our discussion today?
Yeah, no worries. So I've been with the Table Group as a principal consultant for coming up on 3 years now. Prior to that, I spent 16 years in fraud investigations with the Federal Public Service here in Australia. Worked a lot of time with cross-agency teams, so I spent a lot of time doing that. I then moved into financial services, spent about a decade in there working in both large organizations and small organizations, working with teams there. And then, as I said, almost 3 years ago now, joined the Table Group.
So a couple of things about the book. I've read a few reviews of it, and obviously I've thumbed through a couple of the chapters. It's written, as I heard it described, as a business fable, meaning it's based on a fictitious company and talks through the dynamics of the executive team in that company, right?
So I just say, most of Pat's books are written as a fable. I think Pat actually wanted to be a screenwriter when he was younger. So fiction, has a great affinity with fiction. So he's written one book that isn't a fable, but the rest of them are all business fables. Correct.
Well, I'm sure everybody's curious about what exactly these five dysfunctions are. So let's just spend about a minute trawling across each of the five and give us a little bit of a sense of not just the word, but like what it is and what that problem, how that problem manifests itself in organizations.
The dysfunction number one is the absence of trust. And when you look at the model, it's actually shaped as it's a pyramid that the model is, and trust obviously sits at the base. Because it's the foundation of how do we actually tackle the rest of them. If we haven't actually built that level of trust, we struggle with all the other dysfunctions. Quite often we're used to predictive trust, the fact that if we work long enough together, we can kind of predict behavior. We understand that, Phil's going to always be there on time in the meeting, or if I ask him to do a particular thing, it does or doesn't get done. What we're talking about in this sort of trust, we're talking about vulnerability-based trust, that genuine ability to actually say, I got it wrong, or I don't know the answer, or you're better at that than me. Can you help me be better? These are the things that can be a real struggle and a challenge, especially at the C-suite level. We kind of feel like we have this persona of perfection we have to have in order to sort of, hey, we're at the top of the tree. We must know everything. Well, that's not actually true. It can be really hard to be the actual facts. And all being vulnerable really is admitting to the human condition, is admitting to the fact that we're human and we all make mistakes. We learned that when we were kids.
Absolutely, and you're right. As you get more senior, you can't afford to say that there was a mistake or that you don't know everything, right? And then so moving on, then the second dysfunction.
The second dysfunction is the fear of conflict. When you build that level of vulnerability-based trust, when you can actually genuinely say, I'm sorry, or I don't know the answer, or hey, can you help? Conflict then just becomes passionate, unfiltered debate in search of the truth or the best answer. That's what great healthy conflict in a team is. And the fear of it keeps us in that artificial harmony. The idea that we don't want to go to work and rock the boat, but we're really doing our team a disservice, because without that level of healthy debate, effectively, we're making decisions based on not all the information if people aren't contributing what they know and the experiences they've had that they bring to the table.
All right, and the third dysfunction?
A lack of commitment. And what that comes down to, and I know Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, kind of coined the phrase disagree and commit. The ability to disagree in the moment, like around when you're having that passionate, unfiltered debate, but once a decision has been made, to just genuinely commit to whatever that decision was. There's a difference between being kind of intellectually committed to something or being emotionally committed to it. Like the bar is different. I can sort of walk out going, yes, I can see the reason for that, and I'll go and do whatever I have to do. Or I am genuinely all in, and I'm going to do everything in my power and my team's power and everything that I have available to me to make this a success. And there's a genuine difference. The genuine challenge is in the commitment part, is to actually walk out of there clear and aligned with what it is we've committed to do, even if it wasn't what you thought was a great idea. That's what a great team will do.
Okay. And there's a couple of these I want to come back to once we go through all five. So number 4.
It is the avoidance of accountability. In most cases, we don't like to hold people accountable because it makes us feel uncomfortable. We're normally pretty good at holding people accountable for what we can see on a spreadsheet, whether it be, is it red, is it black, are we, how are we going against our KPIs, those sorts of things. Leaders are pretty good at that. They feel comfortable with going, okay, you missed your numbers this month or whatever it happens to be. That's pretty simple. When we're talking about accountability in this particular model, remember we've based the whole thing on this level of vulnerability-based trust that we've been able to build in the team. That enables us to hold each other on a peer-to-peer basis accountability as well. Because quite often what happens with accountability, it's quite hierarchical, But what we're talking about is genuinely being able to hold each other on a peer-to-peer basis in real-time accountability. It's really struggling, and we'll avoid holding people accountable for behavior because that feels really uncomfortable in the workplace.
So yes, accountability, not just for the results, but for the behaviors, the how you do it, right, around that. Absolutely, very, very important as well. 5th dysfunction.
Yeah, what are we doing all of this for? Like, there's a whole reason that we have all these sort of things that we're trying to overcome, and that's an inattention to results. We are actually trying to achieve something. This isn't a sit around the campfire, sing kumbaya sort of stuff. We're actually really trying to get things done. But what we have to make sure that we're focused on is what it is that we're doing as a collective. Like when we're talking about teams, we're talking about the inattention to the collective result. Quite often we end up really attentive to our individual results, which takes us away from the focus of what are we trying to do together. As a leadership team, and when we try to build a cohesive leadership team, the sum of the parts is way more than the individuals. So we need to understand that we win or lose together as a team. And this concept of the fact that your number one team should be the leadership team you're on, not the business line unit that you lead if you come to that C-suite. Your most important job is as a member of the leadership team, not as the chief marketing officer.
Just let me trawl back across these then, because it's quite interesting. The two that stick out for me actually are the trust one and the commitment. And so if I can just start with trust then. So as you said at the start, willingness to sort of accept that we're not all perfect, willingness to accept that we don't have all the ideas, all of the knowledge. How do you kind of address that then? How have you seen companies try to increase trust across a business?
The game changer is the leader. Like, there's no two ways around it. When it comes to being vulnerable in a leadership team, and especially when we're talking about C-suites and executives and just any team, to be fair, but especially in that environment, is if the leader is unable to be vulnerable, then nobody else on his team ever will be. What keeps us from being vulnerable quite often is in the past, when we have been vulnerable, it's kind of been held against us. It's gone against, it's a black mark rather than a badge of honor. Like, if you haven't actually done something good, you've gone, how could you actually have stuffed that up?
Indeed. And I was just wondering if whether COVID and the dispersion of people, out of the office and not together, whether of all the dysfunctions, I don't know if you have an opinion on whether COVID and the last 18 months has had any particular adverse impact.
The thing that initially executive teams and lots of teams found in that beginning part of COVID is it actually opened them up a bit. They were able to be a bit more vulnerable. There was a real opportunity to kind of connect a bit more and to be a bit more genuine about the actual person, So the commitment part, I think it's Has COVID made it harder?
So okay, mate, let's take it as maybe COVID's had a sort of net positive effect. Commitment generally, though, as I said, a difficult thing to back an idea that wasn't yours. So how have you seen companies deal with that?
In the commitment space, what we're trying to avoid is uncertainty and ambiguity. So what we have to do when we come to that commitment space is we have to be crystal clear on what it was we decided. Because that's really important, because we could make a decision and we could say the same thing and two people kind of hear a different message. I guess the challenge with the commitment piece, it comes back to it moves up the triangle to the accountability part. Once we've committed to it, it's the accountability part that holds everybody onto the line of what it was we committed to, whether we agreed to it or not. So if I've committed to something, even if it wasn't me that it was my idea, maybe I still have doubts, some uncertainty around whether it's going to actually work. If I'm not doing what's required of me, or if somebody in my team feels like I'm not fully in, and then I should be called on that. Somebody should call me on that and say, hey, Matt, I get this feeling that you're not all in. We need to talk about that because it's required of all of us to be all in. So the other thing to remember on the commitment piece is making sure that we give people the opportunity to weigh into it. When we're in the disagree part, if people have had that opportunity to weigh in, they're far more likely to buy in, even if it didn't go their way.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So before we round this out now with a sort of few lessons for everybody, I mean, what's your favorite dysfunction?
My favorite dysfunction is trust. Well, it's my favorite thing to overcome. When you actually see a team sort of increase that level of trust and be able to go to a place where especially when we're talking executives, to go to the place where they can genuinely be vulnerable with each other, it does change the game. The thing that most teams find probably the hardest, and one of the things that is the last piece of the puzzle to come, is that accountability piece. That's the one that's probably we do. There's a team assessment report that we do that is which you can get there's a free version online, but it gives you like a color score across the 5 dysfunctions, and the most common areas that are the lowest score are trust and accountability.
There's a reason why trust is dysfunction number 1, because of its sort of base to the whole model, right? If you had to distill down the 5 dysfunctions, which I'm sure every company, every leadership team experiences in part or in whole, any just sort of words of wisdom to distill that down into a bit of takeaway advice?
Yeah, I guess being really clear on what the leader's role is in building a cohesive leadership team, a genuine one. The fact that teamwork it's a strategic choice. Like we have to actually make a decision to be a team, and it requires an emotional commitment. If we think about all the great teams we've ever been a part of, whether it be at work or in a sporting world, we normally understand there's a genuine emotional commitment that is required when you're on a great team, and that's something that we just need to remember. If we're on a great team, it's not just about day-to-day 9-to-5 execution on a strategy. Great teams are emotionally invested with each other and in the team. All it is, and the other thing, if you think about it, Philip, this isn't rocket science, but what they are is common sense delivered with uncommon levels of discipline. And that's the part that can be the real challenge for us sometimes as leaders, is the fact that it's relatively straightforward, but it requires persistence and discipline and rigor around keeping it front of mind, making it become sort of muscle memory for how we operate as a team.
Indeed. The table group, then we'll put the link in the video. But I remember you saying before we jumped on, there are some resources there, and obviously people can read a little bit more about each of the dysfunctions and probably some case studies and so forth. What else is on the site?
Yeah, there's a bunch of free resources on the site. The table group, we're very open source about, hey, here it is. Go and have a go, and how can we support you in any way possible? Obviously, we have a consulting arm, but we're very happy for you to jump on. And as I said, there's a short order team assessment report that that's a free downloadable one. There is a longer sort of one that you pay for, but that's a different part. But you can certainly access a short form one that'll give you a bit of a score against each of the 5 dysfunctions. There's handbooks, there's PDFs. You can sort of have a look at the model and the other models that we have as well. So yeah.
Good. Okay. Interesting question. I always like to ask. So, as a leader, what's the main thing you would judge a candidate on when you're recruiting?
Cultural fit. I think it's the number one thing. There's normally a technical competence level that's required depending on what particular role we're looking for. But as soon as that's met, we shouldn't worry about that anymore. What we should be looking for is, are they the right fit for this organization? And part of that is around us being really clear on what are our core values. What do we hold dear, and what are we going to be intolerant of if you don't sort of live within that world. So that would be the thing that I'm always looking for is this person, do they have the same core values as what resonates as our core values as an organization? So I've been really clear with them in that space, and definitely hiring for cultural fit once you've got that minimum level of technical competence.
And a quick few rapid fire things, probably more about Matt Lashbrook, but most elated moment in your career.
I remember I was working with a small startup company. I still work with them now, but the first session we did with them, we sort of went through their organizational clarity and helped them sort of with their core values and their why, their purpose, all those sorts of things. I had a great session. When I came back to see them sort of a couple of months later, they had done up these massive big sort of posters, and they weren't a big organization. They were like a small startup software company. But all around the office, they had these things with their core value, with their purpose, with their strategic anchors and what's most important to them. And I just, it was just such a great thing to see them get it like that.
Okay. Favorite or best mentor?
I give some thought of that because you did give me a heads up on this one. And I am going to be corny and say my dad, to be fair. I was lucky enough to have my dad for half a century effectively before he passed away last year. But he was always wise counsel for me on a range of things. He didn't have the sort of work and business experience that I had, but he had life experience that was transferable across everything I was dealing with. And he was always the best person for me to sort of as a sounding board and a great mentor.
Indeed. Well, Matt Lashbrook, thank you very much. I really appreciate you making the time today.
Phil, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you being interested in how we can help with the 5 dysfunctions.
Indeed. All right. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks. Bye.